The courtroom did not feel like a place meant for children. Its high ceilings pressed down with quiet authority, and the long wooden benches carried the weight of too many stories, arguments, confessions, verdicts that changed lives forever. The air was still heavy, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Every sound seemed louder than it should have been. The shuffle of papers, the creak of leather shoes, the soft cough of someone trying not to draw attention. At the front of the room stood a police dog. He was a large German shepherd, his coat a deep mix of black and tan, his posture perfect, head high, back straight, paws planted firmly on the polished floor. A black harness wrapped around his chest, the word police stitched clearly across it. Beside him stood his handler, a uniformed officer whose hand rested lightly on the leash. The leash was loose. It didn't need to be tight. The dog did not move unless told to. This dog had learned discipline the hard way. His name was Rex, though most people in the room didn't know it. To them he was just another K9, trained, controlled, intimidating. But Rex was more than that. His eyes were alert but calm, scanning the room not with suspicion but awareness. He noticed everything: the man sweating nervously near the defense table, the stiff posture of the prosecutor, the judge's unreadable expression. Rex had been in many courtrooms before. He understood the energy of places like this. Fear lived here. So did anger, regret, sometimes relief. Never innocence. Near the back of the courtroom, almost hidden behind taller adults, stood a 3-year-old girl. She was small even for her age, her dark hair tied into uneven pigtails that bounced slightly when she shifted her weight. She wore a pale yellow dress that looked freshly ironed, as if someone had tried very hard to make this day feel normal for her. Her tiny fingers clutched the sleeve of her aunt's coat with surprising strength. The girl did not know why she was there. She did not understand words like testimony, evidence, or custody. She only knew that the room felt strange, that adults spoke softly but carried tension in their voices, that no one smiled, that her chest felt tight in a way she could not explain. She had learned fear early in life, though she didn't have a word for it. Raised voices made her flinch. Sudden movements startled her. Silence, too much silence, made her uneasy. And this room was full of silence, thick and uncomfortable. The girl shifted her feet and leaned closer to her aunt. Her aunt squeezed her hand gently, though her eyes remained fixed on the front of the room. The woman's jaw was tight, her face pale. She was trying to stay strong, not just for herself, but for the child beside her. The judge entered. "Everyone rise." The sound of benches scraping against the floor echoed through the courtroom. The girl startled at the noise, her fingers tightening again. Rex noticed immediately. His ears flicked, his gaze briefly shifting toward the back of the room. He registered the movement, the sudden spike of fear, but he did not react. He was trained not to. As the judge took his seat and proceedings began, voices filled the room again. Formal, measured, serious. Too serious for a child. The girl's attention wandered, as children's attention often does. She looked at the ceiling, then at the flag standing tall near the judge's bench. She watched a pen roll off a table and hit the floor. Every small movement felt important to her, because she was trying to make sense of where she was. Then her eyes landed on Rex. At first, she only noticed how big he was. Bigger than any dog she had ever seen. Bigger than the neighbor's golden retriever. Bigger than the cartoon dog she watched on TV. His fur caught the light and his chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. Unlike the humans in the room, he wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't whispering. He wasn't tense. He was calm. The girl tilted her head slightly, studying him the way children do, without judgment, without assumption. She didn't see a police dog. She didn't see danger or authority. She saw an animal sitting quietly, doing nothing wrong. Her grip on her aunt's coat loosened just a little. Rex felt her eyes on him. It wasn't unusual for people to look at him. Adults often did, some with admiration, others with discomfort. But this gaze was different. It wasn't cautious. It wasn't fearful. It wasn't calculating. It was curious. Slowly, almost unconsciously, Rex's breathing sinked into an even deeper calm. His ears relaxed by a fraction. His handler didn't notice, yet, but Rex had noticed the child. The girl leaned forward slightly, standing on the tips of her shoes to get a better look. Her aunt whispered her name softly, reminding her to stay still. The girl nodded, but her attention did not leave the dog. Something about him felt safe. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the way he didn't rush. Maybe it was the steadiness in his posture, or maybe it was something older than words, something instinctive. The courtroom continued on, unaware of the quiet shift happening in its back row. Then, without warning, the girl lifted her hand. Not quickly, not dramatically. Slowly, carefully, like she was afraid of breaking something delicate. Her small finger extended, and she pointed directly at the police dog. The movement was tiny, but the effect was not. In the very next second, the room began to change. The girl's finger remained lifted. It pointed not with urgency, not with accusation, but with wonder. Her arm trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of holding it steady. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The gesture itself carried more weight than any sound could have. At first, no one noticed. The prosecutor continued reading from a document, voice steady and practiced. The defense attorney stood motionless, eyes lowered. The judge listened with a face carved from years of restraint. Courtrooms were built to ignore small things. They moved on procedure, not impulse. But then Rex shifted. It wasn't much, just a subtle adjustment of weight, a change so small it would have gone unnoticed by anyone who didn't know him. But Rex's handler knew. His fingers tightened slightly around the leash as he felt the shift travel up the line. Rex's ears angled backward, then forward again. His breathing slowed, his gaze fixed on something behind the handler's shoulder. The handler followed Rex's line of sight. That was when he saw the child. She stood frozen, finger still pointed, eyes wide and unblinking. She wasn't smiling yet. She wasn't afraid either. She was studying Rex the way one studies something important, something that feels familiar even when it's new. The handler frowned slightly. Rex did not break commands. He did not focus unless instructed. Years of training had shaped his instincts into obedience. Yet here he was, focused, grounded, fully present. The handler cleared his throat quietly, shifting his stance to subtly block Rex's view. Rex didn't resist. He didn't move. But his eyes followed gently, persistently, until the handler stepped back into place. The prosecutor faltered. Just for half a second, but enough. The hesitation rippled through the room. The judge looked up, eyes narrowing slightly as he surveyed the courtroom. He had learned long ago that pauses mattered. Silence often spoke louder than testimony. "What's the issue?" the judge asked calmly. "No issue, Your Honor," the prosecutor replied quickly, just continuing. But the pause had already done its damage. Attention drifted. A few heads turned toward the back of the room. Someone noticed the girl. Someone noticed her raised hand. Someone noticed what she was pointing at. A murmur stirred, barely audible, like wind moving through dry leaves. The judge raised his hand again, restoring order with practiced ease. But even as the room settled, something had shifted beneath the surface. The rigid structure of the courtroom, its rules, its expectations, had been gently nudged off balance. The girl's aunt noticed the stares. She followed their gazes and felt her stomach tighten when she realized what the child was doing. Panic flickered across her face. She reached for the girl's wrist, intending to lower it. "Sweetheart," she whispered urgently, "put your hand down." The girl didn't resist. But she didn't obey either. Her finger stayed lifted. Her eyes stayed locked on Rex. Rex felt the room's attention shift toward him. He was used to being watched, but this was different. This attention carried curiosity, softness. It wasn't suspicious. It wasn't hostile. It was human. Rex's training told him to remain still. His instincts told him to do something else entirely. He compromised. His posture softened. The change was slight. His shoulders relaxed. His tail shifted once against the floor. Not a wag, just a movement. Enough to signal calm. Enough to say, "I see you." The girl's face changed immediately. Her lips parted in a small gasp. Her eyes lit up, not with excitement but recognition. She made a soft sound in her throat, a noise halfway between a breath and a laugh. The aunt felt it. She felt the child's body relax, the tension easing from her grip. Confusion crossed the woman's face, followed by something closer to disbelief. She had seen this child tense around strangers, shrink from loud voices, withdraw when attention turned her way. But not now. Now the child was calm. The judge leaned forward slightly in his chair. He had seen hundreds of cases involving children. He knew how fragile moments like this were, how easily they could be broken, how rarely they appeared at all. He glanced at the bailiff, then at the handler. The handler met his gaze. There was a silent exchange, one built on years of understanding people, animals, and the spaces between them. The judge nodded once. Proceedings slowed. Not stopped but softened. The prosecutor adjusted his tone, lowering his voice. The defense attorney followed suit. The court reporter typed more slowly, aware that this was no longer a moment to rush through. Rex stayed where he was. The leash remained loose. The girl lowered her hand at last, satisfied, not because she had been corrected, but because she had been acknowledged. Her small fingers curled inward, resting against her dress. She rocked gently on her heels, still watching Rex, still present. Rex held her gaze. To anyone else it might have looked like nothing, just a dog standing quietly, just a child watching. But Rex remembered other children. He remembered the ones he had found hiding under beds, shaking and silent, the ones whose cries had cut through the night, the ones who had clung to him when adults couldn't reach them. This child felt the same. Different story, same weight. The handler shifted his stance again, subtly placing himself between Rex and the child, not to block the connection but to protect it. Rex accepted the movement without resistance. He trusted his handler. He always had. The girl leaned slightly to the side, peeking around the handler's leg to keep Rex in view. Her aunt exhaled shakily. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, though she didn't fully understand why. Maybe it was relief, maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the realization that, for the first time in weeks, the child beside her wasn't afraid. The judge cleared his throat. "We'll take a brief recess," he announced. 5 minutes. The gavel struck. The sound echoed sharply, but the girl didn't flinch this time. She looked up at her aunt and smiled. A real smile. Rex watched them turn toward the exit. His gaze lingered just a second longer than protocol required. His handler noticed but said nothing. Some moments weren't meant to be corrected. They were meant to be remembered. As the courtroom emptied, the quiet that followed felt different than before. Lighter. And somewhere between a trained police dog and a 3-year-old girl, something important had begun. Something no one could yet explain, but everyone could feel. Rex had learned long ago that memory did not belong only to humans. People believed dogs lived only in the present, reacting to commands, rewards, and routines. But Rex carried memories the way scars lived beneath fur, unseen, but always there. As the courtroom emptied during recess, he remained standing beside his handler, his posture steady, his mind anything but blank. The girl's face lingered in his thoughts. Not her name, not her story, just the feeling she carried, the quiet fear, the way her small body had stiffened before she noticed him, the relief that followed. Rex recognized it immediately because he had seen it too many times before. Years earlier, Rex had not been a police dog. He had been found behind a closed grocery store in rural Missouri, ribs showing, paws cracked from cold pavement. He had been barely more than a year old then, smart, alert, and cautious. When animal control approached, he didn't run. He watched. He waited. That had been the first thing the trainers noticed. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't broken. He was observant. The K-9 program took him in and training followed. Long days of discipline, obedience, and control. Rex learned to track scents through rain and snow, to ignore chaos, to respond only to commands. He learned that fear had a place, but not during duty. But no training erased what came before. His first child rescue had been during his second year on the force. A 4-year-old boy missing from a trailer park, cold night, heavy rain, panic everywhere. Rex had followed the scent to a drainage ditch and found the boy curled against the mud, silent, shivering. When Rex approached, the boy hadn't screamed. He hadn't run. He had reached out. Just like the girl in the courtroom. Rex had stood still then too, letting the child hold his fur while officers arrived. That moment had etched itself into Rex's instincts, not as a command, but as truth. Children and fear didn't need force. They needed calm. The recess ended. People slowly returned to their seats, voices low, movements careful. The girl came back in with her aunt, this time walking instead of being guided. She glanced toward Rex immediately, then quickly looked away, as if unsure whether she was allowed to. Rex didn't move. He didn't stare. He simply stayed. The handler noticed the girl's eyes flick back again. He felt something tighten in his chest. He had joined the K-9 unit for structure, for purpose. He hadn't expected moments like this, moments that cracked through professionalism and touched something personal. He remembered his own daughter at that age. He remembered how easily fear could settle into a child's bones. The judge entered again and the courtroom rose. This time the girl didn't cling to her aunt. She stood on her own, mimicking the adults around her. When the judge sat, she sat too. Small, quiet. Brave. Testimony resumed. Words filled the room, carefully chosen, measured, controlled. But beneath them ran another story, unspoken yet powerful. The girl's foot swung gently beneath the bench. Her hand rested in her aunt's palm, but loosely now. She was listening without understanding, watching without fear. Every few minutes, her gaze drifted back to Rex. Each time he was still there. Each time her shoulders remained relaxed. Across the room, the defendant noticed the shift. He saw the child, saw how calm she was, how different from the last time he'd seen her. His jaw tightened, his fingers curled into fists. Guilt pressed heavily against his chest, though he refused to name it. The prosecutor noticed too. This was the same child who had frozen during the first interview, the same child who had struggled to speak. And now she sat quietly, grounded, steady. The prosecutor adjusted his strategy, not to intimidate but to protect. The handler felt Rex adjust again, not physically but emotionally. His breathing synced with the room's slower rhythm. He wasn't guarding against danger now. He was anchoring something fragile. At one point, a voice rose unexpectedly, sharp, cutting through the calm. The girl flinched. It was small, but Rex caught it instantly. His ears flicked forward, his body tensing for a fraction of a second before he corrected himself. He didn't move toward the sound. He didn't growl. He simply leaned, just slightly, closer to his handler, reducing the distance between himself and the child by inches. The handler felt it. He placed his hand on Rex's shoulder, grounding him, thanking him without words. The girl's breathing slowed again. No one had given Rex a command. No one needed to. The judge noticed the flinch too. He raised a hand, silencing the courtroom more firmly this time. "Let's keep our voices measured," he said. The message was clear. This child mattered. As testimony continued, something else emerged, not just calm but courage. The girl leaned closer to her aunt and whispered something. The aunt blinked, startled, then nodded. For the first time, the girl spoke in court. Not loudly, not formally, but clearly enough. Rex didn't understand the words. He understood the change. He felt the shift the way dogs did, through energy, through breath, through posture. The fear that had once wrapped around the child like a blanket was loosening. When the girl finished speaking, the courtroom stayed silent. Then the judge nodded slowly. "That will be all," he said gently. The girl looked at Rex again. This time she didn't point. She smiled. Rex remained still, but inside something settled. He had done what no training manual described. He had remembered. And by remembering, he had given the child space to do the same, to remember who she was before fear taught her to be small. As the court adjourned for the day, Rex walked out beside his handler, passing close enough for the girl to see the tag on his collar. She whispered his name softly. "Rex." The handler paused, surprised. He looked down at the dog, then back at the girl. Rex didn't turn. He didn't need to. He knew the courthouse hallway felt narrower than before. As Rex walked beside his handler, the sound of their footsteps echoed softly against the marble floors. Lawyers passed by, voices low, eyes thoughtful. The energy had changed. It was no longer sharp and rigid. It was cautious, reflective, almost tender. Rex felt it. Dogs sense shifts humans often missed. The tightness in shoulders, the way breathing slowed, the unspoken weight carried between people who had witnessed something they couldn't explain. Behind them, the girl and her aunt followed at a distance. The girl's small steps were quieter now. She wasn't dragging her feet. She wasn't clinging. She walked as if she belonged there, even if she didn't fully understand why. Rex did not look back. But he knew she was there. His handler, Officer Daniel Harris, slowed his pace just slightly. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to keep the distance comfortable. Daniel had spent nearly 8 years working with Rex. He knew when to pull back and when to allow space. This was one of those times. They reached the end of the hallway near a set of large windows overlooking the parking lot. Sunlight poured in, cutting through the dim interior. Rex paused, sitting automatically as Daniel stopped. "Good boy," Daniel murmured under his breath. The words were habit, but they carried something more today. Daniel glanced toward the girl. She stood beside her aunt, hands folded nervously in front of her dress. She wanted to look at Rex. Daniel could see it in the way her body leaned forward slightly, but she hesitated, unsure of the rules. Daniel understood that hesitation better than he wanted to admit. Courtrooms taught people, especially children, that everything had rules: where to sit, when to speak, what not to touch. But sometimes rules needed to bend. Daniel crouched slowly, bringing himself closer to the girl's height without startling her. "That's Rex," he said gently, his voice quieter than his uniform suggested. "He's very calm." The girl's eyes widened. "He's big," she whispered. Daniel smiled. "He is, but he's gentle." The girl looked at Rex again. Rex remained seated, eyes forward, posture relaxed. He did not move toward her. He did not sniff the air aggressively. He waited. Waiting was something Rex did well. The girl took a small step forward, then another. Her aunt tensed, ready to intervene, but Daniel raised a hand slightly, signaling that it was okay. "Rex won't move unless I tell him to," Daniel said. "You're safe." The word safe landed softly, but powerfully. The girl reached out a hand, then pulled it back again, uncertainty flickering across her face. Fear and curiosity wrestled silently within her. Rex felt it. He lowered his head just a little, making himself less imposing. His ears relaxed. His breathing remained slow and steady. The girl noticed. She stepped closer. Her fingers brushed the air above his fur, not touching yet, just hovering. She took a breath, then finally placed her hand gently against his shoulder. Rex did not flinch. The warmth of her touch traveled through him in a way that commands never did. He stayed perfectly still, grounding himself so she could ground herself too. The girl smiled. Not the hesitant smile from earlier, but a full one, the kind that reached her eyes. "He's warm," she said softly. Daniel felt something tighten in his throat. "Yes," he replied quietly, "he is." For a few seconds the world narrowed to just the three of them. The hallway noise faded. The stress of the courtroom loosened its grip. The aunt wiped at her eyes discreetly, turning away so the girl wouldn't see. Daniel stood slowly. "All right," he said gently, "that's enough for now." The girl nodded, surprisingly cooperative. She withdrew her hand and stepped back, still watching Rex like she was afraid he might disappear. Rex lifted his head slightly and met her eyes. Not as a police dog, but as something steady. Something kind. Court resumed shortly after. This time the girl sat straighter. Her voice, when needed, was clearer. She answered questions without freezing. Each time her confidence wavered, her eyes flicked briefly toward Rex and steadied again. No one spoke of it aloud, but everyone noticed. The judge noticed. During a pause, he leaned back in his chair, studying the room with experienced eyes. He had presided over cases for decades. He had seen fear silence children completely. He had seen trauma fracture memories. What he saw now was different. Not erased fear, but supported courage. As the afternoon stretched on, the judge made small decisions, adjusting packing, allowing breaks, softening his tone. They were subtle changes, procedural even. But they mattered. When court adjourned for the day, the girl looked exhausted, but not broken. As people began to leave, the judge stood. "Officer Harris," he called. Daniel turned. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge glanced briefly at Rex, then at the girl. "Thank you," he said simply. Daniel nodded, understanding more than the words suggested. Outside, the air felt lighter. The girl held her aunt's hand again, but this time loosely. As Rex passed, she lifted her hand in a small wave. Rex stopped. Just for a second. Daniel hesitated, then allowed it. Rex turned his head slightly and lowered it, acknowledging her. The girl laughed. A real laugh. Clear and bright. Daniel smiled, shaking his head softly. Some days, being a K-9 handler meant chasing danger. Other days, it meant witnessing something rare. Something that reminded everyone involved, human and dog alike, that strength didn't always roar. Sometimes it sat quietly and waited. Morning light filtered through the courthouse windows in thin, pale strips, casting long shadows across the tiled floor. The building was quieter than the day before, as if even the walls remembered what had happened. Rex entered beside Officer Daniel Harris, his stride steady, his presence calm. Though no one would have said it aloud, something had changed since yesterday. The courthouse no longer felt like a place meant only for judgment. It felt, for the first time, like a place where healing might begin. Rex paused automatically at the courtroom doors, waiting for Daniel's signal. Daniel rested a hand briefly on Rex's back, a silent acknowledgement of the work he had already done, work no training manual could define. Inside, the girl sat with her aunt near the same spot as before. Her feet barely touched the floor. She wore the same yellow dress, but today her hair was brushed neatly, her posture different. She looked tired but determined. When she saw Rex, her eyes brightened and a small smile appeared just for him. Rex noticed immediately. He didn't react outwardly, but his tail tapped the floor once softly. Daniel felt it through the leash and allowed himself the faintest smile. Court began promptly. The judge spoke calmly, setting the tone. The prosecutor adjusted papers, then looked toward the girl with careful gentleness. Today would be harder. Today, the child would need to speak again. The girl's aunt leaned down and whispered something encouraging. The girl nodded. Her fingers tightened briefly around the edge of the bench, and her breathing quickened. Rex sensed the shift. His ears angled forward, his focus sharpening, not in alarm but in attention. He remained still, anchoring the room with his quiet presence. When the girl was asked to speak, her voice wavered at first. The room leaned inward, listening. A chair creaked. Someone cleared their throat. The girl froze. For a moment, fear threatened to reclaim her. Her eyes darted around the room, then landed on Rex. He was exactly where he had been yesterday. Still, waiting. The girl took a breath. She spoke again. This time her words came more clearly, slowly, carefully. Each sentence carried weight far heavier than her small frame suggested. Adults listened, some with clenched jaws, others with tears forming quietly. The defendant stared straight ahead, unable to look at her. Rex did not move, but inside something tightened. He remembered the boy in the ditch, the girl pulled from a locked bathroom, the children whose fear had smelled sharp and raw in the air. This child carried that same weight, but today she was lifting it. The handler noticed Daniel's own hands shaking slightly. He forced them still. This wasn't about him. This was about her. When the girl finished, silence filled the room. It wasn't the uncomfortable silence from before. It was respectful, heavy with understanding. The judge nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said, his voice low and sincere. "You did very well." The girl looked down, then back up at Rex. She smiled. During a short recess, Daniel guided Rex toward the side of the room. The girl's aunt approached carefully, her eyes filled with gratitude she struggled to express. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what we would have done without him." Daniel shook his head gently. He did what he knows how to do. Rex sat calmly, unaware of the praise, focused only on maintaining the quiet balance of the room. When court resumed, closing arguments followed. Words were spoken, decisions approached. But for many in the room, the outcome had already been shaped, not just by facts, but by the courage they had witnessed. As the day wore on, exhaustion settled in. The girl leaned against her aunt, eyelids heavy, yet even in her fatigue she seemed lighter, less burdened. When the final gavel struck, the sound no longer felt harsh. It felt final. As people stood to leave, the girl slipped her hand into her aunt and walked past Rex once more. This time she didn't stop. She didn't need to. She knew he was there. Outside, the sun shone brightly, warm against the skin. The girl squinted and laughed softly as they stepped into the light. For the first time in a long while, the future did not feel like something to fear. Daniel clipped Rex's leash securely and led him toward the patrol car. "You did good today," he said quietly. Rex glanced up briefly, then forward again. Some victories didn't come with applause. Some came with a child finding her voice, and a dog who stayed long enough for her to use it. The courthouse emptied slowly that afternoon, as if no one wanted to rush away from what had just happened. Voices stayed low. Movements were careful. Even the automatic doors seemed to open more quietly, letting people pass without protest. Rex walked beside Officer Daniel Harris, his pace measured, his posture calm. To anyone watching, he was just a working dog finishing another long day. But Daniel knew better. Rex was tired in a way that training could not explain. It wasn't physical exhaustion. His muscles were strong, his stride steady. It was the weight of awareness, the kind that came from being present when something fragile had been protected. Rex had held space for the child, absorbed fear without reacting to it, offered calm without demand. Dogs did not name such things, but they felt them deeply. Outside, the late afternoon sun warmed the concrete steps. The girl stood near the bottom with her aunt blinking against the light. She looked smaller out here, away from the walls that had amplified her bravery. The courtroom had asked much of her. The world outside would ask more. Daniel noticed her shoulders tense again as a car door slammed nearby. The sound was sharp, sudden. The girl flinched, instinctively stepping closer to her aunt. Rex noticed too. His ears flicked and he turned his head slightly, not toward the sound but toward the girl. He did not move closer. He did not break position. He simply adjusted, letting his calm extend outward like a quiet signal. The girl glanced up and saw him. Her breathing slowed. Daniel exhaled softly. This wasn't over. Cases like this never ended neatly. Court decisions did not erase memories. They did not undo fear. Daniel had seen children testify before, seen the immediate relief followed by long, uncertain roads ahead. Support systems mattered, stability mattered, and sometimes connection mattered more than anything else. The judge stepped out moments later, coat draped over his arm. He paused when he saw the girl, then Rex. He walked over slowly. "You did well today," he said to the aunt, his tone respectful. "Both of you." The aunt nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When she did, her voice trembled. "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge looked down at the girl. "You were very brave." The girl looked at Rex, then back at the judge. She nodded solemnly, as if bravery were a task she had completed carefully. The judge smiled faintly and turned to Daniel. "Good dog." Daniel smiled back. "Yes, sir." As the judge walked away, Daniel felt the quiet truth settle in. The court had done what it could. Now the rest would happen elsewhere, in homes, in therapy rooms, in nights that were sometimes too quiet. Daniel knelt beside Rex, unclipping his harness. The word police disappeared beneath his fur, replaced by the simple shape of a dog who had given everything he had today. Rex shook himself once, a full-body release of tension. Then he sat again, waiting. The girl watched, fascinated. "Is he done working?" she asked softly. Daniel nodded. "For today, yes." The girl considered this carefully. "Does he go home?" Daniel smiled. "He does." "Does he sleep?" she asked. Daniel laughed quietly. "A lot." The girl smiled again, comforted by the normalcy of the idea. The aunt hesitated, then spoke. We're staying nearby for now," she said. "There are appointments, meetings." Daniel nodded, understanding. "If you need anything, resources, contacts, I can help connect you." The aunt swallowed. "Thank you." There was a pause. The girl looked up at Rex, then at Daniel. "Will he remember me?" The question landed heavier than Daniel expected. He looked at Rex, who was watching the girl with the same steady attention as before. Daniel answered honestly. "Yes," he said, "he will." Rex's tail thumped once against the ground. The girl smiled, satisfied. As they prepared to leave, the aunt reached into her bag and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. She handed it to Daniel. "It's her drawing," she said quietly. "She made it last night." Daniel unfolded it carefully. Crayon lines filled the page, messy, colorful, full of energy. In the center was a large shape with 4 legs and a long tail. Beside it, a much smaller figure stood with a bright yellow scribble for a dress. Above them in uneven letters was a word, "Friend." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "I'll keep it safe." The girl waved one last time, then turned away, walking toward the parking lot with her aunt. Rex watched until they were gone. That night back at home, Rex lay on his bed while Daniel cleaned his gear. The house was quiet. The familiar routines helped settle them both. Daniel placed the drawing on the kitchen table. Rex lifted his head, watching. "You made a difference," Daniel said softly, though he knew Rex didn't need the words. Rex rested his head back down, eyes half closed. Somewhere across town, the girl slept with a nightlight on, the stuffed dog tucked under her arm. The world outside her window felt less threatening than it had before. Not safe yet, but safer. And that mattered, because healing was not a single moment. It was a series of quiet ones. And one of them had happened in a courtroom when a child pointed, and a dog remembered how to stay. The courthouse was quieter than usual that morning. Most of the press had moved on, the public had left, and only the essential staff remained. Yet the memory of the girl and the dog lingered like an invisible weight in the air. Every officer, every clerk, every lawyer who had witnessed her courage felt it, even if they could not explain why. Rex walked beside Daniel, paws soundless on the polished floor, his ears flicking at every creak. Today was not about court rulings or testimonies. It was about closure, about the threads of humanity that often went unnoticed amidst paperwork and procedure. The girl returned, once again accompanied by her aunt. This time, she walked without hesitation. Her gaze immediately sought Rex. The dog remained perfectly still, tail low, his large head tilted slightly, as though acknowledging her presence without breaking the quiet authority he carried naturally. The courtroom seemed to shrink around them, silent except for the whispers of soft shoes and turning pages. Everyone knew this moment mattered. The tension from earlier days, the fear, the uncertainty, was thick but undercut by something new: trust. The girl's aunt guided her to the same bench, but the child barely clung to her hand. Her eyes never left Rex. She whispered softly to her aunt, words too quiet for others to hear. The aunt smiled faintly, relief washing over her features. The child was beginning to understand that she could exist in a space without fear. Daniel watched closely, leash in hand, but he had already learned that the most important moments were the ones where he did not intervene. Rex, too, knew. He lowered himself into a calm sit, chest rising and falling slowly, giving the girl the confidence she needed. When the judge entered, he paused briefly, nodding at Rex. He knew the dog had been more than an observer. He had been a pillar of stability. The judge's words, measured and gentle, reminded the room why they were there. But for a few seconds, even the solemnity of law bowed to human connection. The girl was called to answer a question. She took a deep breath. Her voice, soft at first, grew stronger. Each sentence she spoke was deliberate, full of the courage she had been building quietly since the day she first pointed at Rex. Her words were not flawless, but they were hers, filled with honesty and resilience. Rex felt her fear rise and fall like waves, invisible but tangible. He remained motionless, a quiet anchor. He had done this countless times before with other children, but each one left a distinct impression. Each story was different, but the lesson was the same. Patience, presence, and calm could be more powerful than any command. A small sound, a pen dropped on the floor, startled the girl momentarily. Her hand tightened slightly against her aunt, her eyes widening. Instantly, Rex shifted minutely, leaning his weight just enough to project calm, letting her know she was safe without breaking his stance. She inhaled, exhaled, and continued. The courtroom watched in silent awe. Lawyers and officers, hardened by years of procedure, were touched in ways they had not expected. The judge's eyes softened behind his glasses. Even the defendant's gaze flickered involuntarily toward the girl, though he refused to meet her. Minutes passed, each one stretching like hours. Then, with a final word, the child finished. The room seemed to exhale together, a collective relief that did not need to be spoken aloud. The judge spoke softly, deliberately. "You were very brave today," he said. "Thank you." His gaze lingered on her briefly before moving to Rex. "And thank you as well for reminding us that courage can come in many forms." The girl smiled at Rex. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. She simply looked, a silent acknowledgement of the connection that had grown between them over the past days. Rex remained seated, stoic yet gentle, aware that this was one of those rare moments that mattered far beyond the training manuals or duties of the day. During recess, Daniel led Rex to the side. The girl followed, curiosity in her eyes. She stepped closer than the day before, her fingers hovering above Rex's back before she finally touched him. The dog's fur was warm beneath her small hand, and she smiled. The warmth radiated not only through her hand but through her entire posture. "You're safe," Daniel said quietly, observing her interaction. "He won't move unless I say." The girl nodded, eyes wide. For a moment, she allowed herself to relax completely. Her fingers sank lightly into Rex's fur, a gesture of trust that could not be forced or trained. The rest of the day unfolded slowly. Testimonies continued, decisions were made, and paperwork moved forward, but the energy in the courtroom had shifted irreversibly. The presence of one child and one dog had created a ripple that softened everyone's approach. Adults spoke more gently. Officials walked more deliberately. Even the walls seemed to hold less tension. When the day finally ended, the girl and her aunt prepared to leave. She turned for one last glance at Rex. He met her gaze, held it, and lowered his head slightly, a subtle gesture that said, "I am here. You are safe." She whispered just loud enough for Daniel to hear, "Thank you, Rex." Rex's tail tapped lightly on the floor. He did not respond in words, but his presence communicated everything necessary. He had done more than guard a room or obey commands. He had offered courage, comfort, and calm in a moment that mattered far more than anyone outside that room could understand. As they walked out into the late afternoon sun, Daniel clipped Rex back into the harness. The dog had fulfilled his duties, but the intangible weight of what had occurred lingered in both their hearts. The girl held her aunt's hand loosely, glancing back one last time. She didn't know it yet, but this small courtroom victory, her ability to speak, to trust, to feel safe, would stay with her for years. And somewhere in the quiet way only dogs can measure, Rex had carried a piece of that courage too. Daniel exhaled, watching them disappear into the parking lot. The day had been exhausting, emotionally and physically, but it had also been profound. He patted Rex gently. "You did something today that no badge or command could ever measure," he said softly. Rex lifted his head slightly, ears flicking, as if acknowledging Daniel's words. Then he lowered it again, content to remain still. Some victories do not come with headlines. Some victories are quiet. And some are witnessed only by a dog, a child, and the adults who learn, sometimes too slowly, how power and kindness can coexist. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long golden rays across the courthouse steps, a subtle calm settled over the scene. The girl's laughter lingered faintly in Daniel's memory, the softness of Rex's patience etched into his heart. He knew this moment would stay with him forever. And though the story was far from over for the girl, for the child she was becoming, and for the work Daniel and Rex would continue, the courage they had all witnessed that day would ripple forward, unseen but undeniable in ways that mattered most. The following week, the courthouse felt different. The echoes of the previous days still lingered in the hallways, but now they carried a softer tone. Courtrooms, which had always been associated with tension, decisions, and judgment, seemed almost lighter. The shift wasn't due to policy or procedure. It was because of one child, one dog, and the invisible bond they had formed. Rex and Officer Daniel Harris arrived early, as usual. The morning light streamed through the windows, and the polished floors reflected it like glass. Rex walked with his usual discipline, yet there was a subtle alertness today. He knew something significant had happened here, and he could feel it in the air. The girl arrived with her aunt, holding her hand gently but confidently. She looked calmer, steadier than she had days before. Her yellow dress, still neat, seemed to glow in the soft sunlight. She didn't cling to her aunt. She didn't shrink. She walked with a cautious pride, and her eyes immediately sought Rex. When she saw him, a smile spread across her face, small but full of meaning. Her hand lifted instinctively as if to wave, but she held back. She simply looked, letting her presence connect with his. And Rex, as always, responded, not with movement but with attention, patience, and calm. Daniel watched closely. He had seen many moments of courage and fear, but this child's growth had been remarkable. Fear had been replaced, piece, by trust, and the dog had been the bridge between them, a bridge built of patience, instinct, and quiet strength. The courtroom was quiet as proceedings began. Today it was procedural, final signatures, confirmations, and the conclusion of the case. Yet no one could ignore the lingering energy in the room. It wasn't just a legal proceeding anymore. It was a testament to human and animal connection, to bravery in its quietest forms. The girl was asked a few simple questions, ones she had answered before, but this time her voice was confident. Each word she spoke carried clarity and courage. She glanced once at Rex, and that brief moment seemed to steady her further. Every adult present felt the weight of that gaze, small, yet powerful enough to remind everyone of the strength of innocence and trust. When the final gavel struck, a hush fell across the courtroom. For most people, it was a signal to move, to leave, to continue with their lives. But for this child and for the dog who had anchored her, it was a moment of quiet triumph. She turned to her aunt, whose face shone with relief and pride, then looked toward Rex. The dog remained still, his gaze calm and steady. Daniel allowed her to approach. She stepped forward slowly, her small hand hovering above Rex's shoulder before finally resting on him. He did not flinch. He did not shift. He remained a pillar of reassurance. The girl whispered softly, almost inaudibly, "Thank you, Rex." The words seemed to fill the room in ways that speeches or verdicts never could. Daniel knelt beside the dog, a lump forming in his throat. "He doesn't always get the credit," he murmured, "but today he did exactly what needed to be done." Rex lifted his head slightly, ears flicking, then returned to his calm sit. No badge, no medal, no words could fully capture the significance of what he had done. And yet, everyone who had witnessed it felt it deeply, a silent acknowledgement of heroism beyond human measure. As they walked out together into the bright afternoon, the girl held her aunt's hand loosely, glancing back one last time at Rex. He met her gaze once more, and for a brief moment it was clear that something important had been exchanged. Not just gratitude, not just relief, but an understanding that courage could be quiet, steadfast, and unspoken, and that it could last far longer than a courtroom session. Outside, the world seemed calmer. Birds chirped in the distance, cars moved with their usual sounds, yet the girl's laughter rang lightly, unrestrained for the first time in weeks. It was the laughter of someone who had reclaimed a part of themselves that fear had tried to take. Daniel clipped Rex into his harness, preparing to head back to the K-9 unit. He paused, looking down at the dog. "We'll keep doing this," he said quietly. "One child, one step at a time." Rex lifted his head, ears alert. He understood, not in words but in purpose. He had been trained to protect, to serve, to obey. But today he had done more. He had healed in small but profound ways the heart of a child. The girl and her aunt walked away toward the parking lot. The sun reflected off her dress, golden and bright, and she glanced back one last time, smiling at Rex. That smile, full of trust and gratitude, was a bond neither time nor distance could break. Daniel watched them go, then looked down at Rex. "You're more than a police dog, you know that," he said softly. Rex tilted his head, then returned to his calm, steady posture. Words weren't necessary. They never were. That night, as Rex rested in his bed at home, Daniel placed a small drawing on the table, the one the girl had made. Crayon lines formed a large dog and a small child beneath the word friend. Daniel touched it lightly. "You'll always remember this," he said. Rex's ears flicked, as if agreeing. And somewhere across the city, the girl slept with her stuffed dog held tightly. The world outside was still unpredictable, sometimes frightening. But inside, she had discovered a truth she would carry forever. Bravery could be quiet, courage could be gentle, and a friend, even a four-legged one, could help make the world safe enough to face tomorrow. Days later, Officer Daniel Harris would return to the unit. Reports, duties, and training filled his schedule as usual. But the memory of that courtroom, the quiet girl, and the steadfast police dog remained with him. Every so often, when a new child appeared before them in fear, Daniel would notice how Rex's gaze softened, how he waited, how he reminded the world that courage need not be loud to matter. The courtroom had taught lessons no textbook could. That trust could form between beings without words, that presence alone could change hearts, that heroism often comes silently, anchored in stillness and patience. And for the girl, the memory of that dog, steady, calm, and endlessly kind, would remain as a guidepost for life. In moments of fear, she would recall his quiet bravery. In moments of doubt, she would remember the patient strength that had allowed her to speak when she thought she could not. For Rex, it had been another day on duty, but one unlike any other. The lessons of past rescues, the instincts honed over years, the quiet wisdom of his kind, all converged in that courtroom. He had not just protected, he had nurtured. He had not just obeyed, he had led. And in the world of children and adults who witnessed it, that made him unforgettable. As the city lights turned on and the sky darkened, Daniel patted Rex gently. "Some days," he murmured, "this job feels bigger than all of us." Rex leaned slightly into his hand. He had known that feeling before, even if he could not name it. And somewhere miles away, a 3-year-old girl would dream peacefully that night, the warm image of a steady, gentle dog at her side. She would awaken tomorrow braver than yesterday, carrying with her a lesson that only a child and a dog could teach. That courage is quiet, patience is powerful, and sometimes the smallest gestures can change everything. For Rex and the girl, that moment had lasted forever, and the world was just a little better for it.